Hi, welcome back to Science 1206, the Chemical Reactions Unit. I'm Ms. Ledwell, and in this video, we'll talk about polyatomic ions. Let's begin. What is a polyatomic ion? The prefix poly means many. A polyatomic ion is an ion composed of groups of two or more atoms of different elements. In the table below, I'll show you some examples of polyatomic ions. But note, these are always given in a table provided. You do not need to memorize them. Our first example is ammonium, and the formula for ammonium is NH4 with a positive charge, and the charge is 1 positive charge. Our next example of a polyatomic ion is acetate. The formula for acetate is CH3COO with a negative charge. Our charge is -1. Our next common polyatomic ion is nitrate, and the formula for nitrate is NO3 with a negative charge, and the charge is -1. Our next example is nitrite, and the formula for nitrite is NO2 with a negative charge. Our charge is -1. Our next example is carbonate. The formula for carbonate is CO3 with a charge of -2. Then we have sulfate. Formula for sulfate is SO4 with a charge of -2. And the last example I'll show is phosphate, PO4 with a charge of -3. The atoms in a polyatomic ion are strongly bonded together, so the entire ion acts as a single unit. The net charge applies to all the atoms that together comprise the polyatomic ion. In other words, the group as a whole shares the charge. For example, permanganate, MnO4 negative, has 1 manganese and 4 oxygen atoms. This polyatomic ion has an overall charge of -1. The group MnO4 negative as a whole shares the charge. Note that compounds containing polyatomic ions are not binary, because they contain at least 3 elements. For example, calcium nitrate contains a polyatomic ion, nitrate, and is not a binary compound. This compound contains the elements calcium, nitrogen, and oxygen, so it has 3 elements in it, and binary compounds only have 2. Here are some more examples of ionic compounds that are not binary. All of these contain polyatomic ions. Our first one is potassium nitrate, so it has the elements potassium, nitrogen, and oxygen. Our next one is lithium carbonate. It has lithium, carbon, and oxygen. Next, we have aluminum phosphate. It has aluminum, phosphorus, and oxygen. Silver nitrate has silver, nitrogen, and oxygen. And then we have calcium hydroxide, which contains calcium, oxygen, and hydrogen. Remember that binary ionic compounds are ionic compounds that contain only 2 different elements. Calcium nitride is an example of a binary compound because it contains only 2 elements, calcium and nitrogen. Here are some more examples of binary compounds. Note that all of these binary compounds contain only 2 elements. We have potassium bromide, lithium carbide, aluminum phosphide, silver nitride, and calcium oxide. In the table of polyatomic ions, you may notice that many of the ions end in ate or ite. Only a few end in ide, like cyanide and hydroxide. This is helpful for recognizing ionic compounds with polyatomic ions. When you see a polyatomic ion with a name ending in ite, it means that it has 1 fewer oxygen atoms compared to a similar ion whose name ends in ate, but they both have the same charge. Let's look at an example. Here we have nitrate, NO3 negative, compared to nitrite, which is NO2 negative. Notice that nitrite has 1 less oxygen than nitrate, but the same charge. Now it's time to do a quick review of what we learned about polyatomic ions. Before you move on to the next instructional video in this lesson, Complete the polyatomic ion matching game activity found in Brightspace.